Next up in our movie reviews in Barbenheimer weekend, it's time to talk about Oppenheimer. And I feel like my demeanor needs to change because, unlike after I went to go see Barbie, I had this really happy and positive outlook on life, like I could take on the world. After watching Oppenheimer and walking out of the theater, I felt the complete opposite way. I had like this feeling of dread inside of me, this icky feeling after learning about Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, and really the weight of what that creation had on him, the effects it had on history and all of the moral dilemmas, and really the way it changed how the entire world goes to war. It was very unsettling in the way the entire movie unfolded. Even from the very beginning, the opening scene, it was just like, oh man, this is going to be something different. And I really didn't know how Christopher Nolan was going to take on a full on historical drama because a lot of his movies really push the envelope on filmmaking and some piece of technology, whether it be Tenet, even though that didn't really land with me completely. I appreciated him trying to make something completely different. I just didn't really think it worked. I didn't really think that entire movie made sense. But you look at movies like Inception, Interstellar, even what he did with the entire Dark Knight franchise, even with Dunkirk, a much more straight ahead war film, there was always an element of action. So I wondered how taking away all those elements and just making a movie with a lot of dialogue and being such a deep character study, exactly how that was going to feel like a Christopher Nolan movie. And he showed me pretty soon on in the movie exactly what that meant. So, like I said, the entire movie is about Oppenheimer and his role in the creation of the atomic bomb. So you go back to World War II and everything that was unfolding with the war with Hitler and how the United States was trying to essentially end the war. So they look to J.D. Oppenheimer, who is this mad, crazy scientist, and they come up with the idea for him to build this town, bring in all the best scientists from around the world, and have them work for years on this project of developing the atomic bomb. So before I get into more details about the movie without really spoiling it, even though it is based on history, so if you are fully versed in World War II, you may know a lot about this. But for me, it was almost like relearning things that I learned in high school and college. But before I get into more of that, I want to talk about the theater experience because I actually got to see this movie in 70mm IMAX. So this is the best quality you can see Oppenheimer. It's how Christopher Nolan would really want anybody to see the movie. And if you don't know what that means exactly, so when you just go watch a normal movie at the movie theater, it is shown digitally. There isn't anybody there running the projector, having the film on a reel and hitting play. They just all run digitally. And there is also IMAX, where even though you see more information on the screen, it takes up more space. You go see it in an IMAX theater. A lot of those movies are still digital. There is also 35mm, which is another format that I love, but the millimeters is in reference to how big the actual film is. So you have 35mm, and then you have 70mm, which, if you do the math, is double that. So you go from having this much amount of information on the film to double that. What that means is when you go watch this movie, you are fully immersed in the world of Oppenheimer. So normally when you watch things on your TV, or even if you go to the movies, it takes up the entire screen, your entire TV. What 70mm IMAX does is not only extend it a little bit from left to right, but also from top to bottom. So it kind of just stretches the entire thing out. So while watching this movie, you are fully immersed. When it goes to a close-up of Cillian Murphy's face, you see their entire face, and it's unlike anything I've really experienced. And when you see it projected on 70mm, this film weighs 600 pounds and is 11 miles long. So that is a lot of information on the film reel. You can actually hear it spinning in the theater during quiet parts. You hear that little ticking of a projector, which as a movie fan, I enjoyed. I would elbow Kelsey when you could hear that sound because it felt so cool to see it the way it was intended to be seen. And you can tell a difference between something being shown digitally and being shown on actual film. And how I would describe it, when you see a movie in 70 millimeter, it appears that every single scene could be its own photograph print. So it was as if they took a camera in the highest quality and just took individual pictures of every scene. And if you were to pull one of those, you could print it and put it on your wall and it would look like a piece of art. Like every shot was so perfectly orchestrated. And there was also a level of warmth and depth to it, seeing it in 70 millimeter IMAX. So this was the first movie I've ever seen like this. And the reason it also makes so much a difference is because this is how this movie was shot, with IMAX cameras, with film. So this is as close as it gets to seeing something in 3D without 3D glasses. I don't really like 3D movies. I don't really think it adds the level of depth that they say it does. This is the way more people should be making movies at this scale. Christopher Nolan is one director that I fully trust to do it. So he actually paid to have this IMAX projector fixed in Nashville, because there are only, I believe, 19, maybe 20 theaters in the United States who are showing it this way, because it is so expensive, because it takes up so much room. And the theater here in Nashville had the capabilities of it, but it was broken. So Christopher Nolan paid out of his own pocket to have it fixed so that Oppenheimer could be seen how he intended it to be. So it adds depth and it adds clarity. That's how I would describe it. Now, another issue people are going to have going into watching Oppenheimer is the 3-hour runtime. I feel like directors of his caliber have a vision. And I saw this a little bit with Avatar and James Cameron. And I realized the format they are using is they are making each act an hour long. So that is exactly what this movie is. In that first hour, you really get to know about Oppenheimer, how really he's not even the best person. He is a womanizer. He is so just obsessed with his work and neglects the other parts of his life. So you really get a deep dive into his character in that first hour. And the second hour is all about the development of the atom bomb and all of the trials and tribulations that go into that, and essentially leading up to the moment of detonation. And then the third hour, the third act, is really all of the falling action and the repercussions of what they just created, what they just unleashed on the world, and how it affects Oppenheimer. And the way Christopher Nolan was able to make this story his own was, one, with the cinematography, with all the aspects of it having that real film look and these beautiful scenes. There's one scene in particular, I love it when movies have a scene that take place at dawn in a landscape where there's mountains and just that like blue color and that sun coming up just a little bit, that you really can't tell if it's dawn or dusk. That looks so beautiful on cameras and really capturing the essence of all these characters. And the other thing that he is kind of known for and is able to do is build a lot of tension. And this movie has a lot of dialogue, so you're going to be listening and paying attention throughout this entire movie. And how he adds that tension in Oppenheimer is through the use of the score, where it's all just chugging along, and making it feel very dramatic, like it is building towards something, because really that is what this movie is doing the entire time. It is building and building on that moment, and through the use of the score, it just gives it that feeling that something really impactful is happening. It also just kind of builds this feeling of dread, and it reminded me a lot of the score in The Dark Knight, where it's just kind of chugging along throughout the entire movie, that you think, oh man, this is not going to end well. And it really doesn't. And there were just so many beautiful scenes and just rushes of sound that were very big and jarring, because characters would just be having this conversation and all of a sudden the entire screen is just flames and there's a big whoosh that happens that really just kind of catches you off guard. But one of the most beautiful scenes I have ever seen in a movie is once they actually test the atom bomb. And how that scene was handled was so beautifully done. And I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it, but I felt something during that scene. And there was just kind of this chilling moment that I was in a sold out IMAX theater. and the entire theater went silent. You could hear a pin drop, which is amazing because you have all these adults that probably just want to be on their cell phones. But in that moment, it was so quiet and it was so peaceful that I felt this moment of serenity while watching a movie. And if I could experience one moment in filmmaking again, it would be that moment. Because after you watch it for the first time, it's not going to have that same impact. So that was something beautiful. That was something that can't be taken away from me. And I'm glad that the entire story up to that point was so well done, that that moment was so significant and so beautiful and just made me think, oh man, this is the reason that I love movies. So it had one of the best payoffs out of any movie. And it also had one of the most impressive casts, not only in a Christopher Nolan movie, it's by far his most impressive cast, but really in any movie that I have to pull up my letterbox just to see the entire cast because I don't want to forget a bunch of people, which I'm going to anyway. But you have Cillian Murphy for the first time having the lead role in a Christopher Nolan movie, which he has been one of his go-tos throughout his entire history of filmmaking. And that's also what I love about Christopher Nolan. And it's kind of like an artist having this palette of colors he likes going to, that he feels comfortable with. That is how I feel that directors really show their tone and their style, that they go back to this color palette and use it over and over again to make their art, because he knows that these are the actors who can do his vision justice and he trusts them. So seeing Cillian Murphy get that starring role and be able to show us just how great of an actor he is was truly amazing. But I would say there are probably 20 actors in this movie that could easily star in a movie and carry their own. Like they could be the A-list actor of any movie, but yet you have this ensemble cast that works together so well that it makes the experience fun, because you think, oh man, how are they going to use this person? How are they going to use that person? You have major stars in, I don't want to call them minor roles, because in movies there are no small parts, there are only small actors, but you have really A-list actors having one or two scenes. It's like going to a restaurant and asking them to take their finest food and stuff it with their second finest food. It's just layers and layers of great acting. So aside from Cillian Murphy, you have Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, who was amazing in this movie. He's really not one of my favorite actors, but he continues to surprise me again and again. I don't think he'll ever make it into, I love Matt Damon, but was really good in this movie, maybe because it was a little bit unexpected. But Robert Downey Jr., the entire time I wanted to see him as Iron Man, but he totally eclipsed that. And he says this is the best movie he's ever done. Like I said, as an Iron Man fan, as a fan of the Avengers, I found that insulting but exciting going into this movie, and he truly delivered. Florence Pugh was amazing in this movie. You had a Safdie brother, Josh Hartnett, who is kind of having a comeback. I just see him as his character in Halloween H2O. Michael Myers is dead, but now seeing him in this and in Black Mirror earlier this year, I guess he's coming back. But even moving further down this cast, like Rami Malek has a pretty minor role in this movie. An Academy Award winner is not a main character in this movie. Then you have Josh Peck, who the entire time he was on screen, I just wanted him to yell, Megan, it's spherical, spherical. You also have the guy who was the star of Sky High. There are just so many actors in this movie. Even one of the best character actors, Gary Oldman, who I didn't even realize he was President Truman until afterwards, because you put makeup on that guy and he can easily transform into any character. He is very underappreciated. But the list goes on and on and on with talent. And Christopher Nolan did a great job at managing all their characters and getting the performances out of them that he needed to carry this movie along. There are some movies that get an ensemble cast like that, and you don't know what to do with it. You don't know how to direct them. They just kind of get on screen and do whatever they want. This movie, Christopher Nolan had complete control on every aspect of the film. And what the movie also did, ultimately, was give me a refresher on history. And now I'm never going to forget the timeline of World War II and the fact that Oppenheimer, Einstein, President Truman, Heisenberg all existed at the same time. It's a lot easier for me to place it right now. So I feel like this is one of those movies that I not only learned a lot, but I felt a lot after watching this movie. But Oppenheimer was so good and it met all of my expectations. I still don't want to say it's a top five Nolan film for me because you have The Dark Knight, which is number one. You have Interstellar, which is probably number two for me. And then I would probably throw in, I mean, I love The Dark Knight Rises. I know a lot of people don't love that movie, but I felt like that was such a great close on that story. I also really love The Prestige. I mean, there's just so many movies that have meant so much to me that it's probably just right outside the top five. Maybe later, after I think about it a little bit more, it'll earn its way into the top five. I know some people were saying this is his best movie of all time. I don't think it is. It's really, really good, but he's made some amazing movies. I didn't even mention Inception. Inception is up. Yeah, it's no way a top five movie of Christopher Nolan, but it is so good. It's just those top five are so great and have meant so much to me for so long now. It's hard to put it there. Even coming days off of seeing this movie, it's not quite there. But I still think one of the best movies of the year and one that will live on for decades, for probably a lifetime. So for Oppenheimer, I give it 5 out of 5 atomic bombs.